We're talking about the life of David, and David is an incredibly interesting character in the Bible. More material is solely focused on David than on any other character in Scripture. And what's great about David is that no matter what kind of person you are, you can probably relate to some aspect of David's life. David came from humble beginnings, worked as a shepherd boy on the backside of what was popular and what was seen. He was a fierce warrior, so he had a courageous heart. He was a wise leader and king. He was an open, transparent poet. He was also a skilled musician. And so David, like all of us, was multifaceted. He had many different sides to his character. But even though David was all of those things and more, even though he was that warrior, king, poet, musician, David wasn't self-sufficient. David needed people in his life. And last week we talked about the fact that David needed a strong friendship in Jonathan. And this week we're going to talk about that David didn't just have his best friend Jonathan, but he had a community of people that God put around him that encouraged him and he encouraged them. A community of people that he faced hard times and adversity with. And what I hope that you'll see this morning is that what we have here is not just a group of people that got together to sing and to listen to a talk. What we have here this morning is a group of people who face life together. When we go through adversity, we face it together. When we celebrate together. And David had that in his life, even in the middle of what were some really difficult times. In the first two verses of 1 Samuel 22, we read about the formation of that community. But to appreciate how it came together, you need to know that David's at a point in his life where he is a fugitive. David had been chosen to be king of Israel. God's prophet had come and anointed him to be king of Israel. And then the current king of Israel became jealous. Then David led some incredible victories in battle. Most notable, he conquered a giant named Goliath. Perhaps you've heard the story of David and Goliath. And all of these things made the current king, Saul, extremely jealous. So he went after David to kill him. He came extremely close to killing David. David ran for his life. And David is hiding in the cave country when we pick up these verses here in 1 Samuel 22. David therefore departed thence and escaped. He's running for his life, so he escapes to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, he apparently sent word to them. They went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So David escapes alone. He sends word to his family and friends, and then all of these people who were discontent, who were distressed, all of these people who were disenchanted, they come to David and they form this community out in the caves of Adullam, and David becomes their captain or their leader. At this point in David's life, he reminds me a lot of Robin Hood. Now, just to be clear, when I say Robin Hood, what I picture in my mind is the 1970s Disney animated classic where Robin Hood is a fox and Little John is a bear, and there's a rooster that narrates the whole thing and sings. Do you know what I'm talking about? Right? Just a real quick bit of trivia. This is not going to be very helpful spiritually, but the rooster, the voice of that rooster is actually Roger Miller, who is famous for the song King of the Road. If you've ever heard that song, King of the Road, that's that rooster. Doesn't pertain to the message at all, but I just wanted to pass that along. All right? But in this part of his life, David is very much like Robin Hood. He's on run from the king. He's a fugitive. He's wanted by the law. But he's the good guy. And because he is the good guy, people are endeared to him, and people start to gather around him. And while it might look like David is forming a band of thieves in verses 1 and 2, what he's actually doing is he's forming a community of grace. Because while these people weren't wanted in the city, They weren't wanted in Jerusalem. They were unpopular. They were unhappy there. They weren't welcome there. They were welcome with David. David graciously accepts them and welcomes them into his group. And what I want you to see here is that what happens to David in that time is incredible, because David becomes part of a life-changing, life-saving, life-giving community. These people that gather around him, they give him courage, they give him strength, they give him confidence, but more importantly, God uses them in David's life. And today, it's my hope that you'll see the benefit of being a part of a community of grace. If you're here this morning and you don't belong to a community of grace and faith, you don't belong to a church, I hope that you'll see how appealing and attractive it can be to belong to one. If you're here today and you do belong to one, whether here at our church or at another church, I hope that you'll be reminded what a community of grace is for, what its purpose is, why it exists. But more importantly, I hope that every one of us will see just how appealing and beautiful and wonderful and amazing grace is. Because what makes a community of grace appealing is the grace. That's what makes it remarkable. That's what makes it attractive. It's the grace. You see, even if we serve a great lunch today, which, let's be honest, it's going to be pretty great, all right? And even if the musicians did a great job, which, let's be honest, they did, and even if I give a great sermon, which, let's be honest, I won't, even if we did all of that, and we did a great job of welcoming you and being hosts today, none of that could be as impactful in your life as grace can be. More than you walking away with a belly full of fried chicken or barbecue, more than you hearing good music or a good sermon, we want you to experience grace today. We want this here to be a true community of grace. David's community in the caves was attractive to these people. And the reason was that communities of grace are attractive to broken people. They attract broken people. David wasn't having people move out there because it was the caves of Adullam. It wasn't because it was some great tourist attraction. Have you ever booked a hotel online because the pictures look great and then you get there and it's nothing like what it looked like online, right? Like what they showed you was a courtyard with a balcony overlooking, but what they cropped out was the interstate with all the truck traffic right outside your, right? There's not really anything that David could have cropped out to make this cave look appealing on a brochure or on Travelocity. They weren't coming because they wanted to live in the cave. They were coming because they needed a place to belong. David wasn't being visited by the rich and famous that were on vacation. David wasn't being visited by people that were looking for a spa or a resort or someone that was wanting to go on holiday. David was being visited by people who desperately wanted a place to belong. Why would you go to a cave? Because when you're broken, you desperately want to belong somewhere. The Gospels tell us a story about 10 lepers that Jesus healed. And when you had leprosy in biblical times, you didn't go to a hospital. You went out of town. You left the city because you were so contagious. So you couldn't come into the city or the village. You couldn't be around your friends or your family. You had to stay outside the city gates. So who were the people that you could gather with? Other lepers. And so leper colonies would form, and these nomadic groups would make their way from place to place, staying away from anyone that was well, staying away from their family and friends, but being forced together. And Jesus comes across 10 of these guys with leprosy together, and he heals them. And one of them comes back to thank Jesus, and he's a Samaritan. And that matters because there was an incredible amount of animosity between Jews and Samaritans. There was racism, there was rivalry, they didn't get along. So why was this one Samaritan in a group with 9 other Jews? He would have been the butt of every joke. He would have been ridiculed. Why? Because when you're hurting, you desperately want to belong somewhere. And a community of grace should be a place where people who are hurt and broken belong. Verse 2 says that how many people gathered with David? 400. Later, this number would climb to 500. Now, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people to find sleeping arrangements for in a cave. But it wasn't everyone. Not everyone from Jerusalem came out to where David was. Not everyone from Israel came out. It was just those that felt disenchanted, distressed, disheartened. Because all of those people who they were pretty satisfied with the way that their life was going in Jerusalem, they didn't see a reason to move to the caves. And this morning, a community of grace may not be appealing to you if you feel like you're not broken. Feel like you don't need it. I recognize this morning that Faith Church is not for everybody. It's not for everybody. There are other great churches here in our community that perhaps you already attend or you should attend, but I believe that it is for some people. I also recognize that there are some people that after talking with them, I get the sense that their life is so well put together, they shouldn't come back here because I'm going to be a bad influence on them. And if you're here this morning and you feel like that your life is pretty well put together, that may be. And it may be that you have most of what you want and you get to do mostly what you want. But I would tell you this morning that the most content person in here and the least distressed person in here, that even you are incomplete. David had a son who was called the wisest man. And that son had unlimited power, unlimited riches, and when he would later write a book, he said, everything is vanity. The guy who had it all said it's all vain. There was something that was missing. That same son also wrote, He has set eternity in their hearts. He's made everything beautiful in its time, but He has not put it within man to understand God from beginning to end. There is something in us, he said, that we can't quite fix. He was saying that the puzzle of our hearts has a piece that's missing, that no possession, no job, no relationship, no experience can fix or to fit into that piece. Nothing can fill it except for Him. So if you're here this morning and your life is not in shambles, your life isn't broken, I would say that even if it's not broken, it's incomplete. And a community of grace may be attractive to you because in it you can find that peace that is missing in your life. Communities of grace are attractive to broken people, but communities of grace move on from there. You see, communities of grace experience transformation. These people didn't get together to sit around a fire and swap stories of regret. They didn't get together just to simply talk about how life had been cruel to them. I'm sure they did some of that, but what does the passage tell us? It tells us that David became their captain. David didn't become their counselor. David became their captain. David became someone who led them in action. He not only welcomed them in, but he led them out. They experienced some life-changing things. 2 chapters over in 1 Samuel 24, there's a pretty incredible story. David and his men have gone in and out. They've rescued some people from a city that was being attacked. They have provided protection for some shepherds and some farmers. And in their coming and going, Saul has tracked them, and so they're hiding in a mountainous area where there is yet another cave. And Saul chasing them, he's chasing them deep into this mountainous country. He stops to go into a cave to either use the restroom or take a nap or maybe both. And David and his men are in the cave. And they're hiding in the shadows, and Saul doesn't know that they're there. And David's men say to him, "This is our chance. We can kill him." So David quietly sneaks up to where Saul is at, and he pulls out his knife, and he cuts a small piece of Saul's robe off, and then walks back to where his men are and says to them, "Far be it from me to touch God's anointed." What he was saying is, God has a plan, and I'm not going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to trust Him and His timing. Saul leaves the cave and makes his way down the mountain. And David walks out the mouth of that cave, and he calls to Saul, holding that piece of his robe, and says, "Saul, I have had opportunity to kill you, but I have not." And you know what Saul responds with? "David, you have shown me grace and mercy." What those men in the cave saw was that their leader was gracious to his enemy, and that he was also incredibly confident in the Lord. And experiences like that one began to change their lives, began to change the way that they thought about life, began to change the way that they acted. So much so that they did some pretty incredible things. I want you to see this. Turn in your Bible to 2 Samuel 23. Now, we were reading in 1 Samuel 22. Now we're turning over an entire book to 2 Samuel 23. In 2 Samuel 23, we're at the end of David's life. He's had a great reign as king. He's coming down to his last hours, his last days, and he is giving a history of all the incredible things that God has done. And he starts to talk about his mighty men. And let me encourage you, take some time later on to read 1 Samuel 23 about all the mighty men, the things that they did. They were like the Navy SEALs of David's army. But some of these mighty men were with David even back in the days of the cave, even back in the days of Adullam. And he tells us a story of what 3 of them did. So 2 Samuel 23, let's start reading in verse 13. And 3 of the 30 chief went down and came to David in the harvest time unto the cave of Adullam. And the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in a hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me a drink of water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." And the 3 mighty men brake through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and took it and brought it to David. Now just put your finger there. We're going to come back to where I was just reading. David is in Adullam. Saul is coming after him, trying to kill him. While these two are warring with one another, the Israelites' rival nation, the Philistines, say, this is our opportunity to attack them. And they come in and they occupy some of the land in Israel, specifically Bethlehem. And that's significant to David because Bethlehem is his hometown. That's where he grew up. And David says, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem." You know what he's saying? He's saying, "Oh, that God would come and fix all of this that is broken right now. Oh, that God would come and fix everything that I've been hoping for." Do you have a hometown where there's maybe a burger place where, man, they just got the best food, and you think about it every once in a while? Back in Virginia Beach, where I lived for a good portion of my life, there was this little dive of a place called Tony's Hot Dogs. And if I were to take you to Tony's Hot Dogs, you'd be like, "This place is gross. I'm not eating here." But Tony's Hot Dogs are some of the best hot dogs I've ever had in my life. And I don't know how much of that is the fact that they were good hot dogs or the fact that it just holds some significant value emotionally to me. What David says here is, man, I wish I had a drink of water from Bethlehem. Now, David is supposed to be king, but he's hiding in a cave and he's a fugitive. David is supposed to be leading the nation, and yet he is fleeing, and the Philistines are coming and attacking at the time of harvest, and they've taken over Bethlehem, his hometown. And David says, man, I wish that I could have a drink of water from Bethlehem. Everything would be right. And so 3 of these men that have come to David in the days of the cave, they hear what David says, and they immediately jump into action to go and get David a drink of water from this well at Bethlehem. Now, it's incredible that the passage just says, so they went. They went and they broke through the garrison of the Philistines. But it's kind of frustrating because that's all it says. It doesn't tell us how it happened, just that they did it. Now, can you imagine you're a Philistine, you've overtaken Bethlehem, you've set up camp, and you see 3 guys riding at you, and you say, well, we got this. We're going to whip these guys. Can you imagine how large the eyes of the Philistines must have gotten when these 3 men punch a hole through their entire army, and then they get to Bethlehem to draw water out of a well? And 2 guys stand there keeping guard while one guy lowers the bucket down into the well, and then he raises it back up and he pours it in. And then they get back on their horses and they take off right back through. This is incredible. It reminds me of a story in Stephen Ambrose's band of brothers. He tells a story about a lieutenant named Ronald Spears. Spears was leading his men to attack a small village, and his men who went around the back of the village, they lost radio contact. So he couldn't communicate with the men on the back side of the village what the guys on the front side were doing, so he decided he would just run through the town and talk to them. One of his fellow commanders said the Germans were so surprised to see an American soldier running through their camp, they forgot to shoot him. They didn't know what to think. But here's what's remarkable. When Spears got to the other side and he told his men what they were about to do, he then ran back through the camp to join his men at the front side. He was immediately promoted right after that battle, and that legacy lived on. He became famous for that act of bravery. What these three men did was incredibly brave, but it wasn't because it was a part of a military action. It wasn't to save anyone's life. It was to get some water out of a well. Why did they do that? Because they had been so endeared to their leader, the gracious, fearless, confident leader of David, that they risked their lives to provide him with the smallest of tribute. They did something incredible. These guys went from being disenchanted, disillusioned, distressed, to being guys of great confidence and faith. How? Because they saw grace and it grew into faith in their lives. And when grace moves our hearts, when God's goodness and His love to us moves our hearts, it breaks open the soil of our hearts and a seed of faith is planted and takes root. And when we have experienced God's grace and that leads to believing in Him, suddenly things that seem extraordinary aren't that extraordinary. Things that would have seemed difficult a year ago don't seem that difficult today because we have a great confidence in the Lord. These guys went from distressed to courageous because they experienced grace and they grew in faith. And friend, when we gather together as a community of grace, it shouldn't just be to welcome one another. It shouldn't just be to gather together, but it should be so that we gather and we are transformed. It can't just be come as you are. It must be come as you are and leave forever changed. That's what grace and faith do in lives. They transform us. David's men, they do this incredible thing. They have great courage and faith. They come back to David with this water that they have risked their lives to bring him. And remember where I told you to hold your finger? Let's pick up reading. What happens next? Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. Now, if I'm one of these three guys, I got to be going, what? I just risked my life to get this water that you so desperately wanted, and now you're not going to drink it? You're going to pour it out on the ground? And David explains himself in the next verse. And he said, "Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things did the three mighty men." You know what David said? David said, they have risked their lives on my behalf, but I recognize that it is God who should get the credit. And communities of grace aren't just about welcoming, and they're not just about transformation, they're also about giving God the credit. David said, the confidence and the courage and the faith that these men have exhibited, those were all gifts from God. It was God's gift that they succeeded. So He deserves the credit. God was the one that gave them success. God was the one that transformed them, not David. As courageous and gracious as David was, he couldn't change them. Only God could do that. And friend, this morning, anything that Faith Church does that is notable or commendable or remarkable, that's all God. He's the one that changes lives. He's the one that transforms hearts. He's the one that binds up the broken. He's the one that looses the chains. It is God that does that, and He deserves the credit. And when David poured that out to the Lord, he said, I shouldn't drink it. This is God's. It belongs to Him. This tribute is His. He is the one that has changed these men. He is the one that has given them success. He is the one that deserves the glory. You see, it doesn't matter how strong our leadership is. It doesn't matter how talented we are. We can do nothing unless God does it in us. These mighty men, they did something incredible. And David tells the story of what they have done. But he says it is God who deserves the credit. And friend, this morning, as much as we hope that you feel welcome and that you feel like this is a place where you could belong, we want you to see that it is God who does these things in people's lives. It is God who does these things in changing hearts. David has this group of men, and they experience a transformation. But this points to another guy who would lead transformation in a group of men. When Jesus came and He started His ministry, He gathered up some men to be His disciples. And He didn't go to the synagogue and ask for the brightest students. He didn't get the prom kings of the Nazareth high schools. He didn't get the most fearless and bravest soldiers. He got fishermen and farmers, guys who were known for losing their temper and sticking their foot in their mouth. And over the next 3 years, He spent time with them exhibiting grace and faith. Grace and faith. And then the night comes where Jesus is arrested. And when Jesus is taken into custody, all of these men run into hiding. Peter later on denies that he even knows Jesus 3 times. But when Jesus raises from the dead, He welcomes them back into a fellowship with Him. He shows them grace. And the grace that He exhibits and the confidence that they gain in His resurrection changes these men. And the same guys that ran away in the face of adversity become the men who turn the world upside down, proclaiming the message of Jesus Christ and His grace. What was it that changed them? It was grace that grew into faith. It was grace that grew into a heart that believes in the Lord. And friend, this morning, I want you to experience that same thing. I want you to know that God has shown you grace. And when your heart opens up to that, it'll start to sprout faith. When I was 12 years old, my family lived in Nashville, Tennessee. My father worked for Delta Airlines, and Delta Airlines went through what they called 7.5. What that meant is they were trying to get their cost per passenger per mile down to 7.5 cents. They never got there, but that was their goal. So they did everything they could to cut costs. They offered early retirement. They laid off people. They rearranged their workforce, and my father was told that he would be transferred. So the summer between my 6th grade and 7th grade year, the summer before I turned 13, we moved from Nashville and all of the people that I knew to Norfolk, Virginia. And I remember that summer, I would sit on our couch with nothing to do. This is the days before Wi-Fi and iPods and iPads, so there was just nothing to do. There was nobody that I knew to go hang out with, and so I just sat there. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But when the school year started, I made some friends. And over the next 5 years until I graduated high school, those friends and I, we went through a lot of experiences. But many of those guys are currently in ministry, like I am. And what happened over the course of those 5 years is that God showed us grace, and we placed our faith in Him. And I am the man I am today, partly because of those friends that I made that year, but mostly because of what God did through them in my life. He showed me grace, and I placed my faith in Him. And friend, I want you to know that here you've got friends. Here you've got people that welcome you. But more importantly, here you've got people that God would love to use to show you grace and build your faith. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.